I want to preface today's video by saying that it's going to be quite long and quite serious. There's not going to be too many ridiculous things in it. Hopefully there's not going to be a weird ass hair flying in the middle of the fucking video. But yeah, it's going to be quite long and quite serious, and it's going to be about something that I have researched a lot, that I have quite some experience with, and that is quite personal, which is kind of why I have been hesitant to make this video public. I made it quite a long time ago. Well, not that long, but I've been making iterations of it for quite some time, and every time I sort of hesitate and decide not to post it because this is quite a serious subject and quite personal, but at the same time I feel like it can be educational to some people. So yeah, let's just go for it. So today I want to talk to you guys about a illness. It is called multiple sclerosis, or MS. That's in English. In French it is called la sclérose en plaques, and in Arabic it's called التصلب اللوحوي المتعدد. I want to first start by explaining what it is. So MS is a autoimmune disease. What that means is basically your immune system, which is supposed to protect you and defend you against other viruses or other types of illnesses. Basically what happens with MS is that immune system attacks healthy body tissue, healthy cells in your body, which are essential for its functions. And more specifically, it is an illness of the central nervous system. What that means is basically it concerns your brain and your spine. So what happens with MS basically is you have, the neural cell. It's composed of the head part, sort of, which contains the nucleus and the dendrites. And then you have the axon, and then you have the end parts. In the axon, that part of the nervous cell is usually covered with a envelope or a sheath called the myelin sheath. And what happens with MS is basically your immune system attacks and destroys that myelin sheath and breaks it. And what happens afterwards is basically your neural messages that your brain transmits to your other body parts, they kind of stop being able to flow smoothly, and you might experience problems relative to your nervous system and your basically the rest of your body, because your brain controls everything. So yeah, that's sort of briefly what it is. Now moving on to the types. There are quite a few types of MS. I'm not really sure how many, but I would say that there are 4 main ones. The most common one is called relapsing remitting MS, RRMS. And the way the disease acts with RRMS is basically you have an attack or a flare-up or a relapse where you experience some symptoms, but then you kind of take meds, or even on your own you kind of recover, and your myelin sheath sort of repairs the broken parts, and that happens over and over and over again for a number of years, and that's basically what RRMS is. Now the second type is called secondary progressive MS, and this type is usually the type that people with RRMS progress to after, let's say, 10 to 15 years. And with this type, it becomes a bit more difficult for the myelin sheath to rebuild itself after a relapse. So basically what ends up happening is, if you have multiple relapses back to back, and in those relapses you experience several symptoms and you lose certain functions, the rate at which the myelin sheath sort of rebuilds itself and the rate at which you recover and you get back your normal functions kind of decreases, and so you end up with somewhat of long-lasting damages in a way. And the third type is called primary progressive MS, and I think that by far this is the most difficult one to deal with because it's the one that has the least proven treatments associated with it, and it's the one where you basically, every time you have a relapse, you don't really recover any of your functions. You just end up with that damage for forever, sort of. And the disease progression is kind of much faster than the other types, and it's just quite difficult for people with PPMS to live a normal life, basically. There's also a fourth type called primary relapsing MS, which I really don't know much about, so I can't really speak on it. I will include resources in the description to sort of like explain some of the key points that I sort of mentioned during the video. Yeah, so those are the types. Now let's move on to talk about the symptoms of MS. So let me just like preface this by saying that this is a quite random disease, but some of the most common symptoms that people sort of experience throughout their disease course include, I'm reading this from my computer, include fatigue, walking difficulties, numbness or tingling. Like it's sort of when your foot goes numb or like your foot goes to sleep or something like that. It's sort of similar to that, but like for no reason. There's also problems with spasticity, weaknesses, vision problems, dizziness, vertigo, bladder problems, and other things that could happen. But like I said, it's quite random. Like two different people with MS, with the same type of MS, might experience quite different symptoms, and that's where the issue with this disease is basically. I also want to talk about some commonly asked questions. The first one being, is it deadly? Now, I do not believe that MS is directly deadly. I don't think you can die from it. But however, you can, there are cases where people, after long years of being sick and having MS, they could experience some complications. For example, maybe you are having a relapse or you're having difficulty swallowing, and so you choke on something. That's a possibility. Or because you have been under certain treatments which kind of limit your immune response, you could get a virus at some point and die from it because your immune system cannot respond to it correctly. But yeah, in general, MS directly is not really fatal. It's not a deadly disease. It's more like a disease that affects your quality of life, not your life expectancy. Even though there are information that kind of say that MS can reduce your life expectancy by a bit less than 5 to 10 years. So yeah. Another question that people ask is, who gets MS? Like, what kind of people get MS? And I want to say that there is no proven cause why people get this disease. Like, I don't think it's genetic. There is no evidence of it being genetic. There are people who, in their family, there is no history of MS, and all of a sudden they have MS. So it's not really, you can't really pinpoint the exact reason why you get it. Anyone can get MS anywhere from 15 years old to like 40, 50 years old. But I would say that most people most people get diagnosed with it in their 20s. And I would say also that it is more common with women to have MS, like it is with most autoimmune diseases. For some reason, women tend to have them more. Who knows why that is. But yeah, so far there is no definite cure. There are some treatments which are called DMTs or DMDs, which are disease-modifying treatments or drugs. And what they do is they modulate your immune system. They kind of sort of limit it so that it does not attack your healthy body cells. But there is no definite cure that would get rid of it forever. There are people who like recover from it at like, I don't know, 40 years old or something like that. There are some random cases where people are in complete remission, but that tends to happen randomly. Like I said, it's a very random disease, and there's no clear prognosis. Like, you know how like with cancer or with certain types of illnesses, the doctors can tell you basically what's going to happen to you. They can't really do that with MS because there are things that could happen, there are things that might not happen to you. It's just basically super, super random, and which is like that's why it's quite difficult to deal with for doctors and for patients. The same on it. It's like it's not it's not a simple equation. So yeah. So far we covered what it is, the types, commonly asked questions. Now I think it's time for me to talk about my personal experience, and for that I'm gonna need to go to the bathroom first. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk about my personal experience. I want to say that my entire life I have never had neurological symptoms. I have never experienced anything weird that could be perceived as neurological or anything related to anything that could be due to MS or anything like that. But about 2 years ago, in May of 2018, I started experiencing some sort of vertigo / loss of balance. I was like basically unable to walk in a straight line. I was just like sort of walking like this, like a drunk person, out of nowhere. And I was in school at the time. I was like doing summer classes, and because it bothered me so much and I was like feeling dizzy and stuff like that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the doctor. So I went to a general practitioner, and he told me not to worry about it. He was like, yeah, it's probably just vertigo, and he gave me like some generic medications and told me to take them, and if it doesn't work, then it's probably my inner ear, right? Because it's responsible for balance and stuff like that. And at that time, it was the only symptom that I had. It was the loss of balance. And then I took those medications, did not work. Had to stop going to school and basically drop the course that I was taking. Yeah, I went to the ear doctor. And before I went to the ear doctor, I started experiencing a new symptom, which is nystagmus in my left eye. What nystagmus is basically involuntary eye movements. Basically, what I experienced personally was when I looked to the extreme left, as in like all the way left, my eye would start doing this, like vibrating up and down, and it was kind of painful, and I couldn't really see. So I couldn't drive. I couldn't see in my left periphery, and yeah. Then when I went to the ear doctor, I had already like done some research. I did go to med school for a very brief time, but like I was still sort of able to research and able to understand some things in medicine. And so after I left the general practitioner's practice at that time, I started Googling, and I was able to narrow my symptoms down to two things, which are the inner ear and MS. But at that time, I had never heard of MS. I would never have suspected that I could get it, or that someone I know could get it, or anything like that. The only place that I ever heard of MS was in Dr. House. So I did not really think about it in that way, but I was still freaked out because when I read about it, I was like, oh shit, this is some this is some serious shit. So when I went to the ear doctor, I was like praying for it not to be MS. He examined me, and turns out it was not an ear problem. He was like, you need to go to a neurologist right now, and I was like about to fucking cry because there were only two possibilities, and if it's not an ear thing, then it's probably this fucking chronic horrible disease. And yeah, I went to the neurologist, and she gave me like tests that I knew she would give me because I had Googled it, and I found out that for people to diagnose MS, there is no direct way, but you have to like sort of start with like an MRI. So I did that, and then I was hospitalized. They took blood tests, which is usually done to rule out other infections or other diseases that could act like MS. And then I had an evoked potentials exam, which is basically they stick needles to parts of your body wherever you're experiencing weird symptoms. For me, for example, they did that to my head to sort of examine my optic nerve, because that's where I was experiencing the nystagmus. That was the third test, and the third clue that I had that it was what I had feared, which is MS. And then the last exam was a lumbar puncture. And let me tell you something, like I have been watching medical shows my entire life, and I have been around people who are, you know, in the medical field, and whenever I hear about LPs or needles, huge ass needles that go into your back, I was freaking out. Like I was like, oh shit, this is gonna hurt. But then, you know, in the end it did not really hurt. I had local anesthesia, and the doctor at the hospital was super gentle, and it turned out okay. But by that time I was like already freaking out inside. Like it was not I was not expecting to be emotional because it's been quite a while. But yeah, at that time I was like, oh shit, this is exactly what I would expect if I were being, you know, diagnosed for MS, you know? Because like, let me tell you something. The first neurologist that I went to was quite okay, but then she sent me to her daughter because she was going away or something. She sent me to her daughter, and her daughter is such a fucking idiot. Like, the entire time I was in the clinic, she would not communicate with me in an honest way. Like, she would be like, oh no, don't worry about it, you don't have cancer. And I'm like, bitch, that is not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, do I have MS? And she never, like, she always dodges the question, and I was like fucking freaking out. And I knew what was happening, but like nobody was telling me, and it was just horrible. But thankfully I wasn't alone at the time. I had someone with me, and my parents were also with me, and yeah. Oh, the reason why it hit me quite heavily emotionally, I don't know if I'm like making any sense at this point, because like I'm losing my ability to be you know, composed. But at that time I was freaking out because I was only 21 years old, and here I was being like fucking struck with these news where like they were basically telling me, obviously I over dramatized it in my head because like I had done research and stuff like that, but I was being told at 21 years old that I might not have the kind of life that I imagined I would have, because people who know me, they know that I'm quite active, quite energetic, I'm quite outgoing, I love adventures, I love like being physically all over the place, and here I am being told that I might, worst case scenario, that I might end up in a wheelchair. That's not that is not an easy kind of thing to deal with at 21 years old. And so in the end, I stayed like 5 days in the hospital. Then I left, went back home, had to rest for like a couple of weeks, and then I just went back to normal. I just, I recovered completely. Like, I had no longer had the issue with nystagmus, no longer had the walking issue. I was like basically reborn as a new normal person. And yeah, I have been okay for the past 2 years, until now. It's actually kind of funny because like as I was filming the video, like I said, I filmed like multiple times, and a few days ago I started like experiencing new symptoms for the first time in months, actually years, not years, but like in the past 2 years. This hand is basically fucked up. Like it's not like I can't control it that well. Like it's not flexible. It's kind of, sort of rigid, and I can't really hold stuff with it very well, and I can't like move it how I want. Can't even open it correctly. Look at this. So yeah, and now like we're in quarantine, so I'm not really sure how I should go about like visiting the doctor, or like being on steroids, because this is something that I forgot to mention, which is when you have a relapse, the usual way for doctors to treat you and to sort of make your recovery faster is to give you a heavy dose of steroids, and that's what happened in my first relapse. That's why I had to be in the hospital, because I had to like basically have an IV of steroids. And yeah, now it's kind of complicated because it's kind of getting in the way of my work, and it's getting in the way of like just basically my normal everyday functions. And I don't know what to do about it, because if I were to take steroids, it's gonna like fuck up my immune system, and there's a fucking deadly virus going around, so I'm not about to do that. So I don't really know how to deal with it. So yeah. Let's just stop talking about me personally. I want to move on to talk about why I made this video and why I think it's going to be useful. Honestly, when I was being diagnosed, my main issue was that there was no one, literally no one in my life at that time that I knew had MS. Like there was no one that I could relate to. There was no one that could understand what I was going through psychologically, physically, everything. And like I said, even though I had support, which I'm really grateful for, I couldn't really explain it to people. Like the feelings that I was having and the fears that I was having and stuff like that. It was just impossible for me to convey them to other people, because I was like, these people are normal. They don't really know what I'm talking about, so I can't really get through to them. And my main goal after I left the hospital was to find people like me. I was like, oh shit, I need to find people who have MS. So what I did was I joined a bunch of Facebook groups. There is this one called Women with MS. Started looking for like not-for-profits and associations and communities and stuff like that, because like I said, it was like taking a huge toll on my psychological well-being. And I found out recently through a friend of mine who who also has MS. I found out that there are Facebook groups for Tunisians with MS, but they're not super active. They don't meet. They don't really talk that often. And so the reason why I'm making this video is to basically create some sort of network, hopefully, of people with MS, and maybe we can create another Facebook group where we can be more vocal about our issues and talk about our difficulties and our problems and our experiences, and perhaps we can even meet if that's possible. we can meet and talk and like chat about it. Because like imagine being 15 years old and you get this news. Like I was 21, I was like semi mature enough and strong enough to face these kinds of news, even though it fucked me up for a while. But like imagine being 15, because there are people who are 15 who get diagnosed, and it's just fucking unimaginable to me. And I was like, I need to create some kind of community here. I need to do something so that people in the future, if they're getting diagnosed, or if they already got diagnosed and they're feeling lonely, or they're finding difficulty relating to other people or whatever, we can just be there for each other. And so that's my main goal out of this video. I hope that anyone who's watching who knows someone with MS, or who is themselves diagnosed with MS, they can benefit from this video. If you know someone, please send them this video, and maybe like try to consider the fact that this is not a rare illness. There are quite a few people out there who have it. It's like, I thought that it was rare, but it's actually not. Like, it's not super common, but it's not rare either. Like it's quite a thing for multiple people out there. So we need to do something about it. We need to become more vocal about it. And there's a lot of shame associated with it, because it's such a difficult illness to deal with. Because in normal circumstances, if you're not having a relapse, you look perfectly fine, and you are perfectly fine in those times. And in my experience over the past 2 years, I was completely okay. Like I could do everything. Like there is no limitations to what I could do, except for like trying to avoid heat because it can trigger a relapse, or trying to avoid really strong liquor like whiskey. Obviously, do not smoke if you have MS. Do not make my mistake. Stay on your meds and stop smoking. So yeah, I guess that's it for me. I think we went over everything that I wanted to talk about. I hope it was useful. If you ever are interested in me making like a sequel to this, or like a video where I dive a bit deeper into MS and into my experience, let me know in the comments. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful, and yeah, my nose is very runny. Bye.